A very warm welcome to you all. And I'd like to welcome you to the first edition of Designing Cities for All of Us program. Because in this year, Pakhuis de Zwijger extensive 2-year activity program will begin. Designing Cities for All of Us will commence with the support of the Creative Industries Funds, which we're very happy with, of course. Because in the context of a super diverse city, how can designers contribute to the creation of inclusive cities for and by everyone? Cities of belonging, as we would like to call them. Cities in which everyone feels and is allowed to feel at home. Not only in a spatial sense, but also concerning the digital domain and relating to the design of our public systems, services and products. Next to many designers, scientists, experts, educational institutions and other involved partners, we will dive into the matter of redesigning inclusive cities together with a total of 6 fellows. 6 fellows that we've invited. In our 2021 fellowship program, next to our main guest, Lyongo Juliana, who's here already. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
We will talk a little bit more extensively in a moment, but I would like to introduce the other fellows to you as well. Next to Lyongo, we have invited Indy Johar, Galit Ariel, and you, of course. For 3 months, they will be the fellow that will research designing cities for all of us and research inclusivity in designing new cities. They will curate a part of the program. And why did we invite those fellows? We did that with the aim of ensuring that everyone, regardless of ability, ethnicity, gender, age and cultural background can participate with equal opportunities in social, economic, cultural and leisure activities in the city. Now, for our main guest, I'm very happy that you're here, that he's here. And we've talked before already, and that was very pleasant, I have to say. So I'm very much looking forward to this program as well. But for the people who do not know you yet, let's introduce you. Lyongo Juliana is director of OZ Caribbean. He fell in love with architecture when he was a student. Architectural engineering at TU Delft. For Lyongo, architecture is not only about making locations more beautiful and in balance, it's about creating a people's experience. As the first architect in residence of 2020 at Arkam's Architecture Center Amsterdam, he investigated the degree of diversity and inclusiveness of architecture in Amsterdam. That's a lot. Did you recognize yourself?
Yeah, well, it was surprising to see all I've done and all that is put forward for me to do even, and that's. But I'm looking forward to it. It really interests me. A small correction: I studied in Eindhoven, but the intention was to study in Delft, but I studied in Eindhoven.
Ah, right.
Yeah, but I really look forward to continue my investigation in this team because I think it's really, really important to keep this beautiful city of Amsterdam, to keep it beautiful for all of us.
Yeah, and we've seen like the plans that developed Amsterdam into an enclave almost of only the rich and the fortunate to live in the city center. And even in the outskirts now, like Amsterdam Southeast or New West, living there is getting more and more expensive. Is that a movement that we can turn around, or is that just the way things go?
Well, I think at least we have to try. I think you cannot have a segregated city. A segregated city will not. It will function maybe for a short period of time, but it's not, I don't think anyone envies that. In the US, you have a lot of gated communities, and that is like the worst part of exclusiveness. Let's put it that way. But that will not function in the long term. In the end, we all have to leave the area that we live in and go to another area to buy something or to meet someone. So it's better that we have all the spaces in between be pleasant instead of only focusing in a city center or on the outskirts. But we have to have focus and try as hard as possible to create a city that is for all of us. So it's taking all people into consideration and not excluding people. And of course, you cannot never include every individual, but at least you should try to understand what the desires are of the people, of all the people of your city.
True. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but first we'll watch a small documentary, a short documentary, because it's called, in Dutch, Op zoek naar inclusie in architectuur, in the search of inclusion in architecture. And it's a documentary made by you and by Pim Gelevert. Yeah. And we will continue the rest of the evening in English, but we will start with this documentary in Dutch. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Enjoy the documentary.
Als we merken dat dingen in onze cultuur veranderen, zijn we bang dat we iets kwijtraken. Maar we raken niks kwijt. De oliebollenkraam blijft gewoon bestaan, maar je krijgt er een broodje bakkeljauw bij. En zo zie je hoe de cultuur steeds rijker wordt. Er komen steeds dingen bij, maar je raakt niet hetgene wat je al had, raak je niet kwijt.
Lyongo Juliana, architect en directeur Caribische regio bij OZ en architect in residence bij Arkham.
Deze uitzending staat in het teken van onze Architects in Residence. We hebben dat een aantal jaren geleden ingevoerd als een manier om directe input en gesprek met de ontwerppraktijk te krijgen en tot stand te brengen. En het ook als een manier te zien om een platform, podium te bieden aan een heel specifiek onderwerp wat een bepaalde architect graag wil agenderen.
My topic is diversity and inclusiveness in architecture.
Wat ik veel merk in de afgelopen maanden dat ik met dit thema bezig ben, is dat men het bijna ziet als een soort sausje. We moeten het diversiteit en inclusiviteit sausje er nog overheen gooien. En dan kunnen we daar ook een vinkje bij zetten. En dan gaan we gewoon weer door met business as usual.
Belangrijk is dat we weten hoe Amsterdam eruit ziet. En wie er in Amsterdam woont en wie die mensen zullen zijn die daar komen wonen straks.
Heb je daar een idee van?
Als je naar de demografie kijkt, dan zou Amsterdam er anders uitzien dan deze tafel. Aan deze tafel is het 50-50 verdeeld, maar dan zou degene mensen met kleur zullen in de meerderheid zijn. Maar als je kijkt in de discussie, zijn zij er niet bij. Kijk, als je gelooft in democratie, dat betekent dat iedereen mee moet doen. Als we gewoon kijken naar de cijfers, Nederland groeit door migratie. Met name niet door de reproductie van de witte Nederlander. Dus daar moeten we ons heel erg bewust van zijn. Voor wie gaan we bouwen?
We zijn met 7 miljard mensen. En in Nederland wonen ook mensen met hun afkomsten in 250 landen. We hebben toegang tot de good practice die zich ontwikkelt overal ter wereld.
Architecten zijn de afgelopen decennia meer bezig geweest om dat iconische gebouw te maken, dan dat ze bezig zijn geweest om een oplossing te zoeken voor de sociale vraagstukken. Terwijl aan het begin van het modernisme had je de Siam-beweging, waarbij alle toparchitecten van de wereld bij elkaar kwamen om met name sociale vraagstukken met elkaar te bespreken.
Je bent dit jaar architect in residence. Wat heb je onderzocht?
Waar ik mee bezig ben geweest is met 3 subthema's. One of them is the public space. Another is the floor plan of the houses in Amsterdam. And also retail en horeca.
In Zuidoost zie je nu een soort transculturele samenleving ontstaan. Waarbij er heel veel culturen naast elkaar leven. En die gaan samenwerken. En dat leidt tot enorm veel unieke samenwerkingen. En unieke producten en projecten en initiatieven. En die enorme kracht die kun je benutten om eigenlijk je hele winkelcentrum opnieuw te programmeren.
If you go to a supermarket, a national supermarket in areas where you have a lot of diverse people, you will see that their stock is different than if you go in an area where you don't have that. So they adapt pretty quickly because of the economic pressure, because I don't think in general that they are much more diverse in their thinking, maybe not as yet. I hope it is, but I think it's an economic factor that stimulates that.
Dus je moet echt op zoek naar wie zijn de nieuwe verbinders. Als je de economische component, als je daar niet goed rekening mee houdt aan de voorkant, in ontwikkeling, wie is de doelgroep die er woont, wat is het draagvermogen van de partijen die aanwezig zijn of die landen, welke behoefte is en welke marktpartijen, aanbieders, ondernemers kunnen dat brengen, laden, dan loop je het risico dat de plank mist.
Hoe krijg je mensen bij elkaar en geef je dat de ruimte en faciliteer je dat? Daar moet je dus de gevoeligheid hebben om te realiseren die bevolkingsgroep die je wil aanspreken, waar is die naar op zoek? Wat bij de World of Food heel interessant is dat er ook een verbinding is met buiten en een verbinding met een parkeerplaats. En de auto is voor een gemiddelde Curaçaoenaar en een Surinamer een heel belangrijk object, waarbij een deel jouw identiteit wordt bepaald. En als jij je auto voor je foodcourt kan parkeren en mensen kunnen zien uit welke auto jij stapt, dat geeft een extra waarde aan die foodcourt.
De auto kan ook gewoon onderdeel zijn van het centrum. De auto hoeft niet als een paria behandeld te worden. Maar als je met je auto dichtbij kan komen, kan het winkelen ook een stuk prettiger zijn. Je ziet hier in Amsterdam Zuidoost dat het heel belangrijk is om dichtbij bij je koopplek te kunnen komen met de auto.
Op basis van vooringenomen aannames, wat de vraag is, zeg maar even top-down plekken benaderen en ze zo neerzetten. Die tijd is echt voorbij. En ik denk veel meer dat lokale DNA centraal stellen op plekken, daar een platform voor bieden en dat een benadering gaat zijn om gezamenlijk plekken te maken.
We komen net uit de intimiteit van de Amsterdamse Poort. Een kleinschaligheid waar mensen elkaar makkelijk ontmoeten. Hier zetten we op een heel groot plein waar je anonimiteit hebt en waar het veel moeilijker is om elkaar te ontmoeten. Als de schaal wat kleiner is het makkelijker dat mensen bij elkaar komen. Dus je zou hier wat meer kunnen doen om te zorgen dat je een soort intimiteit creëert in dit gebied. Dit is echt een overgangsgebied tussen de Amsterdamse Poort en het Bijlmer Arena gebied. En je zou heel graag willen dat die twee werelden in elkaar vervlochten raken.
Op straat leven, dat was eigenlijk in Nederland 50, 60 jaar geleden ook heel gewoon. En ik weet nog dat toen ik in Eindhoven kwam studeren, ik ben op Curaçao opgegroeid, dat ze zeiden, ja, de buren zijn een beetje asociaal, want ja, als het mooi weer is, dan gaan ze buiten zitten voor een huis. En nu hebben we gezien dat dat toch aan het veranderen is. Dus ik denk dat er een verandering van cultuur gaande is in Nederland, waarbij het leven op straat weer geaccepteerd wordt en niet meer de negatieve connotatie asociaal heeft. Zo zag ik ook een artikel in het Parool over jongeren uit Zuid die gaan chillen. Onder andere door alcoholleeftijd konden ze niet meer uit en gingen ze chillen met elkaar. Nou, jongeren in Nieuw-West en Zuidoost deden dat al heel lang. Maar dan heette het niet chillen, maar dan waren ze aan het hangen. En dan waren het hangjongeren. Maar daar zie je dus een verandering dat een subcultuur die de mainstream aan het beïnvloeden is of de mainstream geworden is.
Wij hebben keuzes. Wij kunnen zeggen we gaan thuiswerken. Wij kunnen zeggen we bouwen andere gebouwen. De realiteit voor de meerderheid is dat ze voort moeten gaan in de ruimte waar ze nu wonen en ook moeten werken.
In Amsterdam valt mij op dat ineens een soort hervinding van de openbare ruimte, dat elke hoekje groen, ineens zitten mensen daar te picknicken. Iedereen wil naar buiten, omdat het zo mooi weer is. Plekken die normaal afgesproken gewoon leeg waren. Nu zit een gezin daar te picknicken of een groep huisgenoten.
Camilla gebruikt het woord hervinding. Bij mij was inderdaad het eerste woord wat binnenschoot was herwaardering. In deze tijden dat je binnen geacht wordt te zitten, is het extra fijn als je buiten mag zijn. Hè?
Dan kom je naar het park om te ontspannen en dan word je meteen geconfronteerd met allerlei borden die zeggen wat je allemaal niet mag. Terwijl je juist even vrij wil zijn van regels, even ontspannen, even kunnen barbecuen. En als het barbecue overlast bezorgt, dan zouden we dat toch technisch moeten kunnen oplossen. Als je heel veel niet mag doen in het groen, wat je heel graag in het groen wil doen, waarom zou je het dan willen behouden?
What has been bothering me over the years is also the need always, when something goes wrong, to create more rules, to create more regulations, to try to organize things.
De mens heeft zelf ook een zelfregulerend mechanisme. Je ziet ook van alles en waarom moet er dan nog een bord staan om te zeggen wat je gaat zien of wat je gaat ervaren. Zoals hier een veerooster, het is een heel duidelijk element wat je ziet en dan staat er toch nog een bord gevaar voor veerooster.
Nu zit er ook spanning op die openbare ruimte. Want de ruimte die een ander inneemt, neemt de ruimte van jou weg. En dat is natuurlijk wel iets wat naarmate deze crisis langer gaat duren ook wel een impact kan hebben op hoe die verschillende leefstijlen met elkaar in botsing gaan komen.
Er is een verschil tussen het goed luisteren naar de eindgebruiker of dat de eindgebruiker bepaalt hoe het gebouw uiteindelijk eruit komt zien. Architectuur is een vak waar mensen voor geleerd hebben en ook een talent in hebben. Dus uiteindelijk moet je de ruimte geven aan de architect om te gaan ontwerpen, om ook tegenstrijdige eisen te kunnen oplossen.
Your freedom stops where the freedom of another begins. Probeer is gewoon kritisch te kijken, te observeren van wat zie ik, hoe werken onze plattegronden bijvoorbeeld in Amsterdam. En dan te gaan kijken van wat willen mensen doen. Wat doe je als je aankomt bij je huis, hoe wil je mensen begroeten? Een van mijn standaard voorbeelden is dat halletje. Kan ik iemand een omhelzing geven, wat mijn manier van begroeten is? Ik wil graag mijn schoenen uitdoen. Ook in het Nederlandse platteland is het heel gewoon om je schoenen uit te doen.
Ik heb mijn vraagtekens bij onderzoeken naar woonwensen die alleen bestaan uit vragenlijsten. Al helemaal als die opgesteld zijn door mensen die geen affiniteit hebben met de groep die ze bevragen. In de studie naar woonwensen van migranten in Bijlmermeer staat beschreven dat Ghanese zon op hun terras of tuin niet belangrijk vinden. Iedereen die dicht bij de Evenaar geboren is, die vindt het heerlijk om licht in zijn woning te hebben. Het gaat erom dat zij niet snel zullen gaan zonnen. Ik vraag me ook wel eens af of je aan een bewoner kan vragen hoe ze willen wonen. Zou het niet veel interessanter zijn hun te observeren en hun te vragen wat zij doen in hun woning of wat ze heel graag in hun woning zouden willen doen? De ruimte voor de woningen is steeds kleiner geworden in Nederland. Soms is er helemaal geen ruimte meer tussen de voordeur en de openbare ruimte. Met als gevolg dat de ramen volledig geblendeerd worden. Je kan je afvragen of het dan nog wel zinvol is om op die manier ramen te maken aan de voorkant van de woningen. Misschien moeten we daar iets anders op verzinnen, waardoor de privacy gewaarborgd wordt en de woningen toch daglicht krijgen aan de voorkant. 20, 30 jaar geleden werd er geklaagd over Marokkanen die hun tuin gebruikten als moestuin. En nu is het hip geworden. Dus zo zie je ook hoe onze wooncultuur verandert. Dat dingen die nu hip zijn, vroeger als overlast werden gezien. 30 jaar geleden bouwden we in Nederland alleen maar gesloten keukens. Maar natuurlijk kenden we ook al open keukens in de boerderijen. En nu kunnen we de open keuken niet meer wegdenken. Als ik het onderzoek van BPD moet geloven, willen Turken, Marokkanen en Hindoestaanse Surinamers een gesloten keuken. Een korte search op internet naar woningplattegronden laat zien dat in Istanbul inderdaad alle keukens die ik tegenkwam gesloten waren. Maar in Casablanca zie ik appartementen die een half open keuken hebben die aansluit op de woonkamer. Door onze gebalanceerde ventilatie in onze woningen kunnen wij niet sterk afzuigen. En is dat misschien de bottleneck? Of is het toch het feit dat de keuken afgesloten moet zijn van de andere ruimtes?
Wat je hebt laten zien is hoe je je onderzoek hebt opgezet, hoe ontwerpers daar een rol bij kunnen spelen, hoe die plattegrond op allerlei manieren kan worden aangepast aan specifieke behoeftes en hoe zo'n inclusieve woningbouwplattegrond er dan dus uitziet. Niet als een vinkje, maar als een verbeelding van alle verschillende woonvormen en woonwensen die er zijn.
In de Nederlandse geschiedenislessen die de Nederlandse kinderen krijgen, missen er heel veel onderdelen van die geschiedenis. Waardoor je niet begrijpt waarom Amsterdam eruit ziet zoals die eruit ziet op dit moment. En dan heb je niet die gevoeligheid om te weten wat er gebeurt. I mean, our differences are not big. But not acknowledging the small differences can create a lot of problems. My favorite example is, what do you do with a gift when you get it? Op Curacao, als je een cadeau krijgt, neem je hem aan en zet je hem opzij. Als jij dat niet van mij weet, dan begrijp je niet wat ik doe en interpreteer je dat helemaal verkeerd. Ja. En dat is waar we naar op zoek zijn. Die gevoeligheid moet gestimuleerd worden onder studenten, stedenbouwers, architecten. Daar wordt te weinig aandacht aan besteed van wie is je eindgebruiker en oefenen in het observeren van hoe mensen willen leven. Ja. Systems that exclude don't have a long lifespan. You can do that for a certain amount of time, but in the end it will create a friction and that friction will continue and grow and it will force a change. And it's better as an architect to be inclusive from the beginning. Ik wil Amsterdam voor alle Amsterdammers. En dan komt er dus een Amsterdamse architectuur. Maar je moet dus wel die gevoeligheid hebben om heel Amsterdam mee te nemen. We hebben daar een blinde vlek.
Well, you've touched on so many topics, and very interesting. But the main vein of the documentary is that you should imagine who your end user will be, and there are very interesting parallels that you created in the documentary, or very interesting insights, where, for example, the car in Southeast, the car as a means of transportation, but also as a symbol of your own status, that's not taken in account yet by the local government in order to develop Southeast. Maybe for the current inhabitants, because they don't have to give up their cars, but for future generations, the idea is the car should go. The car shouldn't be as important as it is now. Is that something that's very smart because they take in account what a future generation will do, or isn't it that smart?
Well, what is important is to know what the function of the car is now, what it means for people now. I mean, if it was only a means of transportation, we would all buy the cheapest car and have basically all the same cars. But if you see, people have many different kind of car sizes and also brands. So the car is much more than just a means of transportation. That's one thing. Taking that into consideration, if you want to change that, you have to know where you're starting. If you're working in Southeast, in Amsterdam Southeast, where people are still aspiring to get their first car, how are you going to tell them not to get a car at all if they have been working for years to get that?
Because there's a lack of space. If you get the car, you cannot park it anymore. So you're forced not to buy the car anymore.
Yeah, well, that could be. But I think whatever your aim is, I think it's good to know where you have to start with your end user, where you have to start with the people you want to do that change with. If you don't acknowledge what their reality is, then you're going to try to enforce it on them. And I think that should never be the way you do things. I think you have to go along and understand where they are coming from to bring them to where probably maybe you want to bring them. But to me, it's more acknowledging what the car is. Even if I'm designing less, for instance, less parking for cars, if I design that as a car being like something bad, something negative, that space where I'm going to put that car is not going to have that positive vibe. Yeah. Even though if I'm only making like the 4 parking spots for the cars that we are going to share, if I do that in a proper and in a nice way, that space is going to be more pleasant. So that is my aim. I'm not talking about, it's not a discussion to me if we have to use more or less cars. I think that's a different discussion which is very important. But for instance, in recent research, what people are willing to put aside for a better environment, the car is not a number one. They are willing to fly less, they are willing to do certain other things, but the car, they still want it. And
they don't want to give up the car.
Well, the car has, we as human beings, we look for comfort. What we are doing continuously is trying to make our lives more comfortable. So I think if you want to replace the car, you have to introduce something that is more comfortable. And comfort is not just comfort like the direct comfort, but also time and money is also part of that comfort.
Money should be taken into account as well, because what I understood when I did a program in Southeast about the development with less cars is that some people have the car as an economic means in order because it's cheaper to travel with more people by car than by public transport.
For instance, yeah, so you have to take,
Do you have to take that into account? What I think is very interesting as well is that you, when developing buildings or locations or even public space for the other, you should take the other in account without judgment.
Exactly.
Why is that important?
And it's very important because the moment you judge, that means that your veins are not open anymore to receive. I moved, I think about 8 times I moved over the ocean. So I lived in different islands, I lived in the US. And what it has taught me is that specifically in the first year, not to judge, just to experience. And of course you have your feelings and you deal with them, but try to understand why things are happening the way they are happening. And after that, you can still have a judgment on it. But what we do is we place certain things in a certain direction And then you're not open anymore to receive more information about that. If you have that negative connotation on that car, you're not able to receive other information about the car anymore.
Yeah, and what I mentioned as well is that some parallels that you drew are very interesting. So what you said is people from Morocco or Turkey, they leave their shoes outside of the home or in the hallway. And I can imagine that some people think, yeah, why adapt to different cultures that are entering our country, so to speak? But what you did as well is make a comparison with farms, where farmers leave their clogs and their shoes outside of the home before entering the home. And that perception shifts in order to contribute to something that we know, quote unquote, and then it's more accessible for people to incorporate that. Should that be the task? Should that be the task where you seek parallels from different cultures to Dutch culture, or should the culture stand for itself and be incorporated in designing cities?
Well, you put a lot of things. Okay. First of all, I always do research in the history, in how things got the way they are. And so if you can link something to something that happened in the past already, it makes it much easier for people to accept. That's one thing. I think culture is something that is dynamic and is ever changing. The Dutch culture has been changing forever, because the Dutch culture is just like any other culture, which is always changing. And you don't have to be afraid of that, because no one can change you. I mean, I moved so many times, and so I can say from experience that I'm still the same person. And what I did is adapt things from the different cultures where I lived and made them part of me, because they are very pleasant. And I grew up with a Dutch mother and a Curaçaoian father, and I'm both. I take things from both cultures, and I married a half Moroccan woman and my wife, and I take things from her culture also and make it part of me. So I think we should be less afraid, and it has been happening forever that the culture changes.
Culture is not static, and I agree with that, but still, in order for people to adapt to new cultures or understand, especially when you talk about policymakers, should it fit a frame of reference in order for them to understand? So that's why I made the parallel, or mentioned the parallel that you made about the farms, because even local development people that are working on city development are able to understand that. Is that a skill you should develop, seeing parallels, or should it be just an open view for everything?
No, I think it's an important skill to know your history, and as I mentioned in the documentary, the Dutch history that is taught in school and in university misses a lot of chapters. Why you probably, if you don't know the history, you would not understand why the two of us are sitting here on this table and discussing the quality of the city of Amsterdam, and we have the same rights to discuss this topic as any other person or white person that is from Amsterdam has to discuss this topic, because both our histories go back, are part of the Dutch history, and a very important part of the Dutch history, where only let's say the happy parts are celebrated, but the other parts, that the reason why you and me are here is not taught. And we don't need to celebrate it, but we need to know it, and we don't have to stick in that period. It has happened, and we have to look forward. But we have to know that to be able to go forward. So a policymaker that doesn't know this history will look at Surinamese like, but why are these people living in Southeast? And if you would know the history, you know when they started to come in bigger groups, and what the reason behind that was. So it's also part of you. It's not part of you and me only. It's part of the whole Amsterdam society, that we have people from Suriname living here, with a Surinamese background, with a Moroccan background, with a Turk. It's all part of us.
Yeah. And in that regard, I have to mention the saying from Suriname, in Surinamese, that says, "Fusape go, you mu fusape kmopo." to know where you're going to. You have to know where you came from. So that's quite interesting as well in that regard. Soft skills. We need soft skills. What does that mean?
Yeah, actually, it's very strong skills, the soft skills.
The strong skills are very...
Maybe a few quotes out of the book Soft City from David Sim will explain what soft skills are.
Give us some quotes. I'm very curious about that. Because you're quoting from a book, Soft City.
Yeah, I must say this was my worst part in school, always reading. So I'm probably dyslexic. They never tested it, so I'm going to do my best. As we face climate change, segregation, congestion, and rapid urbanization, we need to build better relationships with the planet, with people, and with the place. That's one part of it. Then the next quote, we know from life that a strong relationship is not a rigid one. Sensitivity and responsiveness are vital components of good relationship. Being in control doesn't mean never changing your position. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Being in control means being able to respond appropriately at a particular moment and in a particular situation. And that response is not always going to be the same. There is give and take. There is time for opening up and time for shutting up. Soft relationships, because of their sensitivity and responsiveness, can do much more and last longer than hard ones. In this way, we might say that soft is hard to break. To finalize, knowing that life is constantly changing, we need a physical framework that adapts and changes with us, something living, something organic, something soft.
Right. Beautiful quotes, but very general as well, in the sense that nobody can disagree with that. So why is it still important for you to have that quote?
Because it's so general and it's so obvious, but still not applied many times when dealing with urban design or architecture.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is the reason why I wanted to share it again. And for me also reading this book was like a moment. I mean, I graduated 25 years ago, and it made me realize why I didn't like urban design when I was in school, because it wasn't dealing with the human being. Mm-hmm. It was dealing with just making like a stamp and repeating that, and I didn't understand it. Mm-hmm. So the funny thing is that what intrigues me the most in my work as an architect were the subjects where I scored the lowest grades when I was studying, and that is something. So I really hope that I can motivate and stimulate younger architects and the ones that are studying that to look at this human aspect, because we are designing for human beings, and it seems to be to the backdrop that is the reality. That is what we are dealing with.
Let's bring that into practice, because you brought this case study about a hospital in Curacao. And the development of a hospital in Curacao. And if I understood correctly, there was never a building of that size built in Curacao before.
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, this is a project I worked on for 8 years. I started in 2011, and it was finished in 2019. And what the challenge is with designing in the Caribbean, I wanted to design contemporary architecture in the Caribbean, and but you cannot buy 10 books about contemporary Caribbean architecture. In this hospital, we wanted to create a contemporary Caribbean hospital. So we had to analyze the local culture. Even though I grew up there, I still had to look at it from a perspective as a designer, as an architect, to understand the culture. What are people doing in a hospital? And what should I facilitate for them to feel at home? Because when we try to make architecture for, let's say, Caribbean architecture, we tend to go to using a lot of colors or using a lot of, like gingerbread, as they call it, a lot of detailing. But that is not all. it's more about understanding the culture and what people want to do and facilitating that.
So that goes beyond the function of a hospital. You go there to be healed. The conditions in where people can heal the best, they were taken into account as well, and family in that regard is very important.
Exactly. And so it's about, for instance, having a big central hall where people meet, because we don't make appointments in the Caribbean. We meet each other on the road or in the hospital and have a conversation for 20 minutes, half an hour. So you have to facilitate that can happen, otherwise they're standing in the way. When giving presentations about the hospital, I always said, you know, an appendix operation is the same in the Holland, in China, and in Curacao. What happens before and after that is different in all different cultures, and you have to understand that. So, for instance, in Curacao, it's very normal to visit a patient with 10 people at the same time. Here, they would say, no, but that's not good for the patient. But if the patient feels comfortable and wants to have his family around him, that will enhance his healing process. Just like we also created healing gardens. People in Curacao mostly live on the ground floor, what we call in the Netherlands villas, but they're very small sometimes and with a little yard. But so that contact with outside, with the gardens, with the mangrove park that is being created now in the south and the Caribbean Sea, the contact is so important for the people to feel that they are at home and to enhance that healing process.
But enforcing a ground floor for a big scale hospital is impossible. How do you combine concepts, not even high rises, but more, more floors on top of each other, and having that same feeling? How do you guard that quality of development?
It's always important when you're making bigger buildings is to bring down back the scale, in the sense of making a more human scale, the menselijke maat, as they say in Dutch. And for instance, what we did with the facade is breaking it up in smaller pieces. So by having these horizontal and vertical bands on the facade, because we can estimate approximately the distance between one column and the other. If we know that is 10 meters, and then you know there are 6 columns, you know it's 50 meters. But if it was just 50 meters, you have no idea. I mean, the difference between a building that's 70 meters high and 90 or 100 meters, you don't see it if they are not next to each other. They're both high. So it's a challenge as an architect, is to, even though spaces are very big, to bring them back to a human scale.
And how do you train or develop that sensitivity in a team? That's probably not everybody in the team is very familiar with Caribbean culture. How do you make people aware of the specific culture that you have to deal with?
It's about telling the stories, explaining, taking the time. We did this hospital basically with a full Dutch team. Many times at the table, even in Curacao, I met with my colleague Chris Swiers. We were the only people of Caribbean descent on the table. And it's about explaining. It's about taking the time for people to understand. And I even do that with the people that were building the building also. It's about trying to explain why something is like it is. And maybe they don't understand, but at least they know that there is one fool that has a reason why he is doing that in that way.
Yeah. But still, how do you avoid stereotypes? Because coming from you, hearing people in the Caribbean, they don't make appointments, they just meet each other in the hallway, so that's why the hallway should be bigger. My experience would be changed probably when a Dutch person would say exactly the same thing without being growing up in the Caribbean. That's my perception and my bias as well. But how do you work along stereotyping and biases that we all have?
Of course, you have to use certain stereotypes sometimes to understand, but you have to be aware that it is a stereotype. I mean, of course, people make appointments in Curacao also. But the important part is that when people meet each other on the street, they don't tell each other, well, let's make an appointment to talk. No, they will start that conversation. And that conversation can last. And it's so, and if you are sincere about how you bring something forward, if you try your utmost and you put all your energy in it, people will feel that and see that. And of course I make mistakes in stereotyping, and but I hope I'm open enough that people come to me and explain that to me. And I will be the first to change my opinion then also.
Will you? Because that's really
Yes.
difficult. How do you train that? Because every human doesn't like to admit that they're wrong. How do you put your ego aside? Because I think that's mainly the challenge in every group that you work with. You have to put your ego aside for the process to enhance.
I think it's a very good question. I mean, I think if your objective is continuous growth, growth in the sense not of money, but of your intellect, of what you can understand as a human, and what you can share, that makes a moment of adjusting is a moment of growth. Because the moment I have to adjust, that means that I'm learning something, and I think that is what keeps me moving, because that's what I really I'm very eager to learn more about others and to learn more about how things work.
You've brought another case as well, another example, and that's Montaña Abou.
Abou.
Abou. See, my Papimento is not that good yet. Montaña Abou.
Yeah.
What's that?
Montaña Abou is a project where I did the urban design first for it. That was in 2011. And then I got an assignment from the only housing corporation of Curacao, Fundación Cas Popular, to design 71 apartments and also 9 senior citizens' homes. And it was really interesting to create a stacked housing, because that's not common in Curacao as yet. And actually what is nice about this, is that this idea, I had it in 1998 when I was working in Sint Maarten, and this project didn't follow through. This idea of connecting and having this open staircases so you can have proper ventilation, and the distance between the two masses, I analyzed that based on the historic alleys of Sint Maarten and Curacao. What is the measurement? So I know that it functioned, because it has been functioning in decades. And also in explaining this to people, they say, but if I go to Outra Banda, which is our city center in Curacao, and there you have an alley of 5 meters, and it works, then I can make these buildings 5 meters apart, which is also the regulation by the fire department for not having to create 60 minutes fire-resistant wall. So it's about the narrative that you tell, but the narrative has to be based on facts. Otherwise, people will not believe you anymore.
And how did you manage to change the perception of people as well in order to live in stacked housing? You just said earlier that people used to live on the ground floor.
Yeah, so this still has to prove itself. I mean, the first inhabitant moved in December, in the first part that was finished. The project is not finished as yet, but as you can see that around the buildings there is still quite some space, it's very important to also for the housing corporation to create space where people can recreate. So you're taking away their garden, but you have to give them something back in public space, in playgrounds, etc. So I really hope they do that.
Right. And when, in your regard, is the project successful?
The project is successful if the people embrace it. I mean, it's nice when colleague architects say, well, you did a good project, but if this becomes a ghetto, then I will feel really, really bad. I mean, what we did, this is actually one of the, it's close to, or it neighbors one of the most difficult neighborhoods of Curacao. And what we started this project with is to do a walk around in that neighborhood. And because and the other side, you had a middle class neighborhood, and those two groups never met each other. Right. And what we did is do a walk and meet each other. Yeah. And up to now, I have not heard reports that there were bigger problems in either two of the neighborhoods, but then now they are connected and people can walk from the one side to the other side.
Going from Curacao back to Amsterdam, that's a big challenge for Amsterdam, not only in the economic sense because the city gets more and more expensive, but also in the sense that more inhabitants are planning on living in Amsterdam. And in 2030, we probably will hit the 1 million inhabitants already. That means that cities are getting denser, especially areas like New West or Southeast. They're developing plans to have the inhabitants living densely on top of each other. And that means something for the public space as well. You're very familiar in New West, you're very familiar with the Sloten Park. The park used to be the place where, you could go to and do almost whatever you want, and you see that the park is being regulated more and more. It's illegal or not allowed anymore to barbecue, which a lot of Turkish families love to do, but they're prohibited now from doing that. How should we go about using public space? Because, regulations are there for everybody to enjoy them, or are they?
Yeah, well, it is important to know what the people want to do in the area. And if you frustrate that, how will they deal with that area again? Will they still love the area? Will they still treat it with love? Or will they treat it with hatred? So, and your first question was the more congested cities, then the public space becomes even more important. So adding more people to a limited area puts a very big responsibility in how you deal with your public space, how you deal with your Sloten Park, how you make sure that the people can still recreate the way they want to recreate. And that is that open mind. Maybe for some, barbecuing is not they don't do it because they don't eat meat but you can also barbecue vegetables, so that's not a problem. But it's about understanding and respecting that.
But again, like you mentioned in your documentary, and I love that quote, my freedom begins where your freedom ends, or the other way around. Who should be taken into account? Because people are annoyed by the fact that people are using their barbecues in the park, and you can smell it. People are very annoyed about that. Which, who will prevail in that sense?
Oh, is that for me to decide? I don't know. What I would do is if the majority wants to have a barbecue in an area, how are you gonna take that away from the majority to cater towards the minority? That I find very difficult. And
but the other way around, if it's a minority and the majority of the people don't want it, don't you need to protect the interests of the minority as well?
Of course you do, and that's why my first answer was, am I to decide? This is what we have to decide with each other. So in conversation, in dialogue, we have to say, okay, this is what we want to do as a society in our public space. And of course, you cannot. Sometimes you have to protect the minority, and sometimes you have to facilitate the majority. It's not the one or the other. But what you see happening now is that there is a small group that knows their way around within the participation regulations, and they are kind of dictating what our city should look like. And that will create, instead of creating solutions, it will create friction in our society. So it's finding a way, in finding a balance, and get in a real dialogue with each other and see, maybe you designate, for instance, a certain area of the park for the barbecue, and another area is not allowed, and that you can have both, that the ones that enjoy the barbecue and can be with the one doing barbecue and the other.
But that's interesting, because that's what happens now. But what I hear you say, if I hear correctly, is you should make sure that every voice is heard, and you should facilitate those different voices to be heard, and not only the voices of the people who know the rules and regulations. And in that regard, I would like to go to the next 3 months, because you are the fellow for the next 3 months. Can you tell us a little bit about your plan in the coming weeks?
Yes. What I realize is that what I can do as an architect or as an urban designer is limited. I can facilitate, but I cannot create a society. So what I am studying now is trying to understand that society, trying to understand what happens, what is needed besides my architecture, or how should I create the spaces to facilitate the society that is in balance, where people feel at home. And that is what I'll be researching in these coming weeks, and hopefully in talks with others. And I invite people that have a certain view on this theme, that how you create society, how you create a city for all of us, and what are things you have to take into account. I'm open to receive hints, and you know, I want to talk with a few professionals on different subjects. In different parts, we will have hopefully David Sim, the author of the book Self City, also as one of them to discuss this theme, because yeah, it intrigues me enormously, because I studied architecture because I wanted to create spaces, and I create spaces for people, and that people, you know, my biggest compliment I can get is when someone sends me a WhatsApp from the hospital and says, Lyongo, thank you for creating this space where, you know, my daughter is now being treated. It's really pleasant. And then I, okay, that's why I do this.
Yeah, that's confirmed that you did a good job. Yeah. What are your blind spots? You know society, you're part of society, but what are your blind spots?
Well, I have many, I think. What are my blind spots? Jürgen, you could have...
like, if it was easy, everybody could be our fellow, you know? We do ask something of you.
Okay, my blind spot is that I can be so focused on something that I forget people around me, people or things around me. So that is, I think, my biggest blind spot. That you are, but I have a few people close to me that warn me for that, and they are really strong. So yeah,
they will be looking sharply to what you do.
Yeah, but that's why also my invitation to other professionals to give me information, because I'm
Let's go straight ahead to the invitation, because it's a very concrete invitation, because you're presenting a triptych, 3 programs on the 15th, on the 22nd and on the 29th of March. There you will present the results of your fellowship, and in the road there to that presentation, to that triptych, there's an active call for action for people who would like to participate. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, we have the idea for the books with the students, which I think you also know.
Yeah, there's a student book club as well. Yeah.
No, so it's an invitation to discuss this with each other, and not that it's my idea. That is not. I like to barbecue, but maybe others not. I mean, to stick with that. I see the value of the car, but that doesn't mean that is the reality. It's dealing with all different kinds levels of reality, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges dealing with architecture in the urban design in the Netherlands, is that we are convinced that there is one reality.
Right.
And if you are by culture, you you grew up knowing that there are many different realities.
Yeah.
Sometimes just the reality of my father and my mother being two different, and they both are completely convinced that they have the right reality. And so I think that is, yeah.
Yeah, and rituals and living rituals or rituals that you do in-house are important as well. Can you give us examples of the rituals that you're looking for, that you mean?
I'm looking for any rituals that I don't know. I mean, it's trying to because I don't know all people that live in Amsterdam. So it's looking for all the rituals that people do in the house, because for too long we have standardized our floor plans. And I question that. I question if those floor plans are still applicable, and not just because we have a lot of people with a migration background, but are they still applicable for the Dutch people that have their full 400 years passed here in the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Are they still, because the Dutch society has changed.
Yeah. And is this corona crisis any part of your research as well? Because I can imagine, or we hope, never waste a good crisis, we hope that we will change things as well because of this crisis.
I dare to say that my previous, my architect in residence at Arcom, and also this crisis has shown us even clearer that there are very big differences within our society. So this crisis has made this program, I think, maybe not possible, but at least that we have a lot of people that are willing to listen because they see, oh, wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know this about my city. I didn't know this about my country, that the differences are this big. And if we want to have a city that works, where we don't need to be afraid to go into certain areas, we have to collaborate to get make these differences smaller.
Right. And to have equal opportunities for everybody, and in that sense, keep the city accessible for everyone as well.
Yeah, it's about having equal opportunities and also not judging too easily to one that maybe could not take his or her opportunity.
Right.
Because it's so easy from comfort to say, yes, but I did this, but you don't know the reality of the other.
Yeah. Very good. There's an email that you can contact if you would like to participate in this topic, or you have contributions in regard to rituals or any blind spot that Lyongo has. And you can send your email to DCFAOU. It's easy to type, it's difficult to pronounce. That's, of course, the short version of Designing Cities for All of Us at thezwijger.nl. So that's the place where you can send your applications, your ideas, well, at least everything. If you would like to say anything to Lyongo, that's where you go. And maybe it's good to mention the book club as well, because David Sims is a creative director at Danish urban design consultancy GAL, and GAL addresses global trends with a people-focused approach. And he wrote the book Soft City, and that will be the book that we will focus on with the book club. And the book club is aimed at students. And you can, it's the book that you selected as well. And you can get the book with a discount, I believe. Do you know more about that?
Yeah, but I don't know the details. I know the discount, but I don't know how much the discount is.
If I'm correct, if you go to Atheneum, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that, where to get that book. You selected the book. Can you tell us why?
Well, I think I touched on it already a little bit. It was recognition. It was confirming. I think I said it early. Before and in Pakhuis, you know, I was very much inspired by Medellin, by Colombia, by the change in Medellin. And this was, let's say, confirming that if you design centered on the human being, you can create change. So it's a process that started 10 years, 11 years ago. And this book was a lot of recognition, a lot of confirmation on things I did already or things I aspire to do.
Yeah, aspire to. Yeah, and Medellin, in that sense, the development that Medellin made from very criminal, dangerous city to a city that is rich of creativity and rich with startups is very inspiring. A little bit more about the book. The book is called Soft City, Building Density for Everyday Life. Is the story of how to build denser and more diverse places that enhances everyday life of people, an antidote to the increasing complexity of urban life. And the book showcases grounded principles and solutions that are combined to create a livable neighborhood and a vibrant public life. It's very, very, very interesting. If you would like to know more about the book club, you can go to the website dezwijger.nl/magazine, and that's where you can learn more about the discounts as well. And what happens as well is that 15 students will get the book for free. So be there, be quickly, because it's an amazing book. And can you, to close this off, can you tell us a little bit more about the triptych, the 3 programs that you're going to present in March? Have you got any idea what you would like to do there?
I like to have an open discussion, and I hope to learn. And in the process that I'm developing myself, that more people can grow with me. That's my main objective. Besides, what I talked about having spaces for people and that people can interact. It's because that's what we can facilitate as designers. So the interaction between, and so that's where my focus will be, to make sure that we can get that interaction between people instead of turning our backs to each other, but getting in contact with each other. And it's not something you should force, but it's something you should facilitate. And sometimes it's by creating space to make that concrete. If you have a gallery that's only 1.5 meters and we have to cross each other, we have to go into each other's space. Yeah. If we have a gallery of 2 meters or a little more, we pass and we can stay within our own space, and then suddenly, maybe after 10 times passing each other, we get an interest in each other. Yeah. Hey, this might be my neighbor. And we see it in the metro, is the way the metro is organized now. Before we had the metro where we were sitting 4 of us looking at each other, and all we were trying to do is avoid each other. And now we have more distance. Yeah. That you might get contact now. Yeah. After. Because it's not forced. It's not forced. Right. Well, thank you. Our time is unfortunately almost up, but thanks again for having this conversation. I wish you the best of luck during your research, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. That's going to be in March, but I have to mention as well, there are more programs for designing cities for all of us, and the first presentation is going to be on the 15th of February already, and then we'll go to the 22nd and the 1st of March. Those are programs in order to discuss what designing cities means and where we can go from there. It's the end of the program now. If you'd like to learn more about the program, if you'd like to learn more about the fellows, if you'd like to learn more about the book club, the book is going to be read and discussed by us and by the students, hopefully. Please go to the website dezwijger.nl/magazine. Well, this is it for now. I thoroughly hope that you enjoy the program and keep checking the site for more information. And I would like to see you on the 15th of February with the next program of Designing Cities for All of Us. Bye-bye.